Roman Empire, Episode 6. How Rome Conquered Italy. Part 1. Opening. From City to Power. Before Rome ruled the Mediterranean, before emperors, marble forums, and armies crossing distant provinces, Rome first had to survive the world around it. It had to master the hills, valleys, rivers, and rival peoples of Italy. The conquest of Italy was not a single war, and it was not the work of one brilliant commander. It was a long, uneven process, shaped by defeat, adaptation, diplomacy, colonization, and the gradual creation of a political system unlike anything else in the ancient world. In the early Republic, Rome was still a regional city-state. Its power was real but limited. It stood in Latium among other Latin communities that shared language, gods, customs, and military traditions. To the north were the Etruscans, heirs to older urban cultures and powerful city-states. To the east and south were the mountain peoples of the Apennines, especially the Samnites, tough and independent communities shaped by rugged landscapes. Farther south, along the coasts of Magna Graecia, Greek cities looked across the sea towards Sicily, Epirus, and the Hellenistic world. Rome did not simply march outward and conquer everything at once. Its rise was slower and more complicated. The Romans fought wars against neighbors who sometimes became allies, then rivals again, then subjects, then partners in empire. Rome's genius was not only military discipline, it was the ability to turn defeated enemies into future soldiers, to turn roads into chains of power, and to turn local communities into parts of a wider Roman order. This episode follows Rome's transformation from a powerful Latin city into the dominant force in Italy. We will move through the conquest of Veii, the shock of the Gallic sack, the wars with the Latin League, the long and difficult Samnite Wars, and the wider struggle for central and southern Italy. We will also look beyond battles, into the deeper systems that made Roman expansion possible: colonies, roads, citizenship, alliances, and the careful management of conquered peoples. In this story, Rome was not yet an empire in name, but the habits of empire were already being formed. The Roman Republic learned how to absorb territory without always destroying it. It learned how to command allies without giving all of them equal rights. It learned how to make war a political system and how to make victory permanent. By the end of this period, Rome would not merely be one city among many. It would stand at the center of an Italian confederation, with soldiers, resources, and ambitions large enough to carry it beyond Italy itself. So tonight, we begin not with Caesar, Augustus, or the legions on the Rhine, but with an earlier Rome, a republic still young, still vulnerable, and still learning how to conquer. A city of farms, temples, assemblies, aristocratic families, and disciplined citizens, slowly discovering that the road to empire began first with the conquest of its own peninsula. Part 2. Latium and the First Ring of Power. Rome's earliest expansion began close to home. The first world Rome had to dominate was Latium, the region south of the Tiber River, where Latin-speaking communities lived in a network of shared culture and rivalry. These towns were not strangers to Rome. They had similar gods, similar military practices, and similar aristocratic families. They could cooperate in moments of danger, but they also competed fiercely for land, honor, and influence. The Latin League was an important part of this early world. It was not a modern state, and it was not simply controlled by Rome at first. It was a loose association of Latin communities, united by common religious festivals, common defense, and practical necessity. Rome was one member of this Latin world, though over time it became the strongest. The early Republic's struggle was not just to defeat foreigners, but to place itself above communities that were culturally close to it. According to Roman tradition, one of the key moments came in the early 5th century BCE, after the fall of the monarchy. Rome and the Latin communities entered into agreements that helped organize military cooperation. The most famous of these is associated with the Firdus Cassianum, a treaty traditionally dated to 493 BCE. Whether every detail preserved by later Roman writers is exact or not, the larger pattern is clear. Rome was learning how to use treaties as weapons of power. A defeated or rival community did not always need to be destroyed. It could be bound into a relationship, expected to supply troops, and gradually drawn into Roman leadership. This became one of Rome's most important habits. Many ancient conquerors could win battles. Rome became especially skilled at making victory last. Instead of ruling every community in exactly the same way, Rome created different grades of dependence. Some communities received full citizenship. Others received partial citizenship without voting rights. Some remained formally independent allies, bound by treaty to provide soldiers. This flexible system allowed Rome to expand without having to turn every conquered town into a directly governed province. But in the early period, Rome's position was still fragile. The Republic faced pressure from nearby peoples such as the Aequi and Volsci, who threatened Latin territory from the hills and mountains. These conflicts were not always grand wars in the later imperial sense. They were often seasonal campaigns, raids, counter-raids, struggles over borderlands, and contests for agricultural land. Yet they mattered deeply. In an ancient farming society, land was wealth, survival, and political power. When Rome expanded, it was often expanding access to land for citizens and security for the community. The conquest of Latium was therefore not a simple story of one city conquering helpless neighbors. It was the story of Rome becoming the central organizer of a regional military system. Through war, treaty, alliance, and colonization, Rome slowly placed itself at the head of the Latin world. This gave Rome manpower, and manpower would become one of the deepest sources of Roman power. For now, Rome was not yet mistress of Italy, but it had begun to build the first ring of control around itself. In this ring, we can already see the future. Rome did not grow only by taking land. Rome grew by creating obligations. It made other communities part of its wars. It transformed neighbors into partners, partners into dependents, and dependents into the human foundation of future conquest. Part 3. Veii and the Etruscan frontier. To the north of Rome lay Etruria, a region of wealthy city-states, older urban traditions, and deep cultural influence. Long before Rome became powerful, the Etruscans had shaped much of central Italy. They built cities, traded widely, practiced complex religious rituals, and influenced early Roman symbols of authority. Roman kingship itself had been closely connected with Etruscan culture. Even after the Republic replaced the monarchy, the Etruscan world remained a powerful presence just beyond the Tiber. The city of Veii was Rome's great northern rival. It stood only a short distance from Rome, across the river frontier, close enough to threaten Roman security and compete for control of trade routes, farmland, and regional influence. The rivalry between Rome and Veii lasted for generations. It was not only a military contest, it was a struggle between neighboring powers whose territories were too close for lasting peace. Roman tradition presents the final war against Veii as a long siege, sometimes described as lasting 10 years, echoing the legendary memory of Troy. The central figure in later Roman memory was Marcus Furius Camillus, a commander who became one of the heroic names of the early Republic. Whether every dramatic detail is historical or shaped by later storytelling, the fall of Veii around 396 BCE was a genuine turning point. When Rome captured Veii, it gained more than a defeated enemy. It gained territory. The lands of Veii were rich and valuable, and their annexation greatly expanded Rome's resources. This was one of the first moments when Rome's expansion produced a major territorial gain. The conquest also showed that Rome could defeat a major city-state and absorb its land into Roman structures. The fall of Veii changed Rome's scale. Before this, Rome was powerful in Latium, but still one city among several. After Veii, Rome controlled more land, more strategic space, and a stronger position in central Italy. It also faced new responsibilities. Expansion meant longer frontiers, more enemies, and more pressure to defend what had been won. This conquest also reveals the connection between religion and war in Roman thinking. Roman tradition says that during the siege, the Romans invited the goddess Juno of Veii to abandon her city and come to Rome. This ritual, known later as evocatio, expressed a deeply Roman idea. Conquest was not only physical, it was sacred. The gods of the defeated city could be transferred into the Roman world. Victory was not simply the destruction of an enemy, it was the incorporation of their divine protection, their land, and sometimes their people. Yet Rome's confidence after Veii did not last long. Only a few years later, the Republic faced one of the greatest shocks in its early history, the arrival of the Gauls. The conquest of Veii had made Rome stronger, but strength also exposed Rome to wider dangers. The city had stepped beyond its first circle of power, and now it would discover that Italy was not a closed world. Forces from beyond central Italy could still descend with terrifying speed. Veii gave Rome territory and prestige, but the next crisis would give Rome something darker and more enduring: fear, memory, and the determination never again to be so vulnerable. Part 4. The Gallic sack and the Roman memory of danger. Around 390 BCE, according to traditional Roman chronology, a force of Gauls entered central Italy and confronted Rome. These Celtic warriors had moved through northern Italy and into Etruscan territory before turning toward the Roman world. At the Battle of the Allia, the Roman army suffered a devastating defeat. Soon after, Rome itself was captured and sacked, except, according to later tradition, for the Capitoline Hill, where defenders held out in desperate resistance. The Gallic sack became one of the deepest traumas in Roman memory. Later Romans remembered it not merely as a military defeat, but as a humiliation that revealed the fragility of the city. Temples were threatened, families fled. The city's sacred and political center seemed exposed to destruction. Even if later accounts shaped the event into legend, the psychological meaning was real. Rome had learned that victory over neighbors did not make it safe. This moment mattered because Roman identity was built partly through memory. The Romans remembered defeats intensely. They did not always hide them. Instead, they turned them into warnings. The Gallic sack became a lesson about preparedness, discipline, fortification, and the danger of disunity. The fear of northern invaders would remain powerful in Roman culture for centuries. Even much later, when Rome was already a Mediterranean power, the memory of Gauls descending on the city still carried emotional force. After the sack, Rome rebuilt. This is one of the most important patterns in Roman history. The Republic could suffer catastrophe and continue. Its institutions did not collapse permanently. Its aristocratic families, religious offices, citizen assemblies, and military obligations survived. The city returned to expansion, but with a sharper sense of danger. Rome's later greatness depended not on never losing, but on recovering from loss. The decades after the Gallic sack were filled with warfare. Rome fought neighboring peoples, reasserted control in Latium, and continued to secure its position in central Italy. The Republic strengthened its military organization and became more aggressive in protecting strategic territory. It also developed a stronger habit of planting colonies, fortified communities of Roman or Latin settlers placed in important locations. These colonies acted as military outposts, cultural extensions, and anchors of control. This system was crucial. Rome did not simply occupy territory with temporary armies, it placed communities into the landscape. A colony could guard a road, watch a frontier, secure farmland, and remind nearby peoples that Roman power was now physically present. Over time, these colonies formed a network of Roman influence across Italy. The Gallic sack also helps explain why Rome became so relentless. To modernize, Roman expansion can appear ambitious, even ruthless, but from the Roman point of view, security and expansion were deeply connected. A neighbor left independent might become a future enemy. A frontier left weak might invite invasion. A rival alliance might threaten survival. So Rome often answered insecurity by extending control farther outward. This does not mean Roman conquest was purely defensive. Rome wanted land, honor, manpower, and dominance. But Roman fear was real too. The experience of danger gave Roman expansion a powerful emotional logic. To be safe, Rome believed it had to be stronger than its surroundings. To be stronger, it had to command more allies. To command more allies, it had to win more wars. And so the Republic continued outward, carrying with it the memory of flames, defeat, and recovery. Part 5. The Latin War and the End of Equal Alliance. By the middle of the 4th century BCE, Rome's relationship with the Latin communities had changed. Rome had grown more powerful, and the old balance within the Latin League no longer satisfied the other Latin cities. They had fought beside Rome, shared dangers, and contributed soldiers, but Rome increasingly expected leadership rather than equality. This tension led to the Latin War of 340 to 338 BCE, one of the decisive conflicts in the formation of Roman Italy. The Latin War was not a simple war between Romans and foreigners. It was a family conflict within the Latin world. The Latin communities were culturally close to Rome, and many had long military and religious ties with it. But closeness can create its own kind of conflict. The Latin cities did not want to become permanent subordinates. They wanted a share in power, or at least a return to genuine partnership. Rome, however, was no longer willing to be merely first among equals. It wanted command. The war ended in Roman victory. But what matters most is what Rome did afterward. The Romans dissolved the Latin League as an independent political force. They did not treat every defeated community in the same way. Some Latin towns were incorporated more closely into the Roman state. Some received Roman citizenship. Others received citizenship without full voting rights. Some remained allies under treaty. A few were punished more severely. This careful variety was one of Rome's greatest tools. Instead of creating one uniform empire, Rome created a hierarchy. Communities had different rights, different duties, and different relationships to Rome. This made rebellion harder. If all conquered peoples had shared the same status, they might have united more easily against Roman rule. But Rome's system divided them legally and politically. One town might hope for citizenship, another might fear losing privileges, another might benefit from alliance. In this way, Rome turned diversity into control. The settlement after the Latin War also expanded Roman manpower. Communities tied to Rome were expected to provide soldiers. This was one of the great secrets of Roman success. Rome did not depend only on the citizens of the city itself. Its military system drew strength from allies across Italy. Every conquest, if managed effectively, could increase the number of men available for future wars. This created a powerful cycle. War brought victory. Victory brought allies and territory. Allies and territory brought soldiers and supplies. More soldiers and supplies made larger wars possible. Over generations, Rome built a military reservoir that few rivals could match. This reservoir would later allow Rome to survive disasters that might have destroyed other states. The Latin War also clarified Rome's political identity. The Republic claimed to defend liberty within its own citizen body, especially liberty from kingship. But outside Rome, it increasingly demanded obedience. This tension would remain central to Roman history. Rome could speak the language of law, duty, alliance, and shared order, while also creating systems of domination. After 338 BCE, Rome was no longer simply the strongest Latin city. It was the organizer of Latium. The old Latin League was gone. In its place stood a Roman-led structure of citizenship, treaties, colonies, and obligations. The conquest of Italy had entered a new stage. Rome had mastered the first circle around itself. Now it would face a more difficult enemy in the mountains, the Samnites. Part 6. The Samnite Wars. Rome meets the mountains. The Samnites were among Rome's most formidable Italian opponents. They lived in the rugged central and southern Apennines, in a landscape very different from the plains and cities of Latium. Their world was shaped by mountains, valleys, fortified settlements, and flexible military movement. Fighting the Samnites forced Rome to learn a new kind of war. The Samnite Wars were not one brief conflict, but a series of struggles across much of the 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE. Traditionally, historians speak of 3 Samnite Wars, beginning in 343 BCE and ending in 290 BCE. These wars drew Rome deeper into central and southern Italy and tested the Republic's ability to fight far from home across difficult terrain against resilient enemies. The First Samnite War was connected to Campania, a wealthy region in western Italy. Campania mattered because it was fertile, strategically placed, and connected to wider Italian politics. Rome's involvement there pulled it beyond Latium and into competition with the Samnites. The conflict was limited compared with what came later, but it opened the door to a much larger struggle. The Second Samnite War was far more serious. It included one of the most humiliating episodes in Roman military memory, the Caudine Forks in 321 BCE. Roman forces were trapped in a mountain pass and compelled to surrender under disgraceful terms. Later Roman tradition remembered this as a moment of shame, with soldiers forced to pass under a yoke, a symbolic gesture of submission. Whether every detail is exact or dramatized, the event showed that Rome could be outmaneuvered and humiliated. But again, Rome's strength was recovery. The Republic did not collapse after Caudine Forks. It adapted. The Samnite Wars likely encouraged changes in Roman military organization, especially the move toward more flexible formations suited to broken terrain. The Manipular Legion, with smaller tactical units, became associated with Rome's ability to fight in varied landscapes. The exact development was gradual, but the lesson was clear. Rome learned from enemies. The Samnite Wars also encouraged infrastructure. Roads became instruments of conquest. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE under the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, connected Rome toward Capua in Campania. It was not merely a road for travel, it was a military artery. Roads allowed troops, messages, officials, and supplies to move with greater reliability. They helped Rome hold what it conquered. Colonies also advanced with Roman power. Strategic settlements secured routes and pressured hostile regions. Rome did not need to place a massive army everywhere if it could plant loyal communities in key locations. Roads and colonies together formed a skeleton of control across Italy. The landscape itself began to be Romanized, not all at once, but through repeated acts of settlement, construction, and military planning. The Samnites forced Rome to become more than a city-state army. They forced Rome to become a power capable of sustained war across regions. They taught Rome that conquest required endurance, not just courage. Against the Samnites, the Republic became tougher, more flexible, and more systematic. This was one of the great turning points in Roman history. The mountains did not stop Rome. They trained it. Part 7. Sentinum and the Great Italian Coalition. By the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BCE, Rome's rise alarmed many peoples across Italy. The struggle was no longer only Rome against one opponent. Rome's expansion threatened Samnites, Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gauls. These groups did not all share the same culture or political goals, but they had one common concern. If Rome continued to grow, all of them might lose independence. This fear helped create one of the greatest challenges Rome had yet faced. During the Third Samnite War, Rome confronted a broad coalition of enemies. The decisive moment came at the Battle of Sentinum in 295 BCE, fought in Umbria. Roman forces faced a dangerous combination of Samnites and Gauls, with wider Etruscan and Umbrian involvement in the conflict. Sentinum was not just another battle, it was a contest for the future direction of Italy. The battle became famous in Roman memory, partly because of the story of Publius Decius Mus, who was said to have performed devotio, a ritual self-sacrifice in which a Roman commander dedicated himself and the enemy to the gods of the underworld in exchange for victory. This story belongs to a wider Roman tradition in which military courage, religious duty, and aristocratic honor were fused together. Whether the details are legendary or historical, the meaning is deeply Roman. Victory required discipline, sacrifice, and the willingness of elite families to die for the Republic. Rome won at Sentinum. The victory did not end all resistance immediately, but it broke the momentum of the coalition. Over the following years, Rome continued campaigns against the Samnites and other peoples, until Roman dominance in central Italy became increasingly difficult to resist. By 290 BCE, the major phase of the Samnite struggle had ended in Rome's favor. Sentinum matters because it showed that Rome could defeat not just isolated rivals, but large coalitions. This was essential for the future. As Rome grew, enemies would often try to unite against it. The Republic's ability to survive coalition warfare became one of its defining strengths. Later, during the wars with Carthage, this same endurance would be tested on a much larger stage. The aftermath of these victories expanded Rome's network of allies and obligations. Samnium was not erased from the map, but it was forced into Rome's sphere. Other central Italian peoples were bound by treaties. Colonies and roads continued to strengthen Roman control. The Republic's reach now extended far beyond the Tiber and Latium. Rome had become the central power of the Italian interior. Yet Roman conquest remained uneven. Some communities were loyal because they benefited. Some obeyed because they feared Roman power. Some waited for a chance to rebel. Rome's system was strong, but not based on equality. It could integrate, but it also dominated. This tension would remain hidden at times, then erupt later, especially during the social war centuries afterward, when Rome's Italian allies demanded full citizenship. But in the early 3rd century BCE, that crisis was still far in the future. For now, Rome's achievement was extraordinary. It had defeated Etruscan cities, mastered Latium, survived the Gauls, broken Latin resistance, endured Samnite warfare, and overcome a great Italian coalition. The Republic was no longer merely expanding. It was becoming the military and diplomatic center of Italy. Part 8. The Roman Method: Citizenship, Colonies, Roads, and Allies. Rome conquered Italy not only with swords, it conquered with systems. This is what made Roman expansion so durable. Many ancient states could win battles, but Rome developed ways to convert military success into lasting political structure. The Roman method combined force, law, settlement, infrastructure, and carefully measured privilege. Citizenship was one of Rome's most powerful instruments. Roman citizenship was not given equally to everyone, and that was part of its political usefulness. Full citizens had important legal and political rights. Others might receive partial rights, such as citizenship without the vote. Some communities became municipia, incorporated into the Roman state in varying ways. Others remained allies, or socii, bound by treaties that required them to support Rome militarily. This flexible citizenship system allowed Rome to expand without immediately overwhelming its own political institutions. It also gave conquered communities something to desire. The possibility of improved status made Roman rule more attractive to some local elites. A town might accept Roman leadership if it meant protection, legal advantage, or future privilege. Rome was harsh when necessary, but it could also be pragmatic. Colonies were another essential tool. Roman and Latin colonies were placed in strategic locations, often on contested land. They secured roads, watched enemies, and spread Roman influence. A colony was both a settlement and a statement. It said, "Rome is here now, not only as an army passing through, but as a permanent presence." Roads connected these points of power. The Via Appia is the most famous early example, but it was part of a larger Roman habit of turning movement into control. Roads allowed armies to march faster, officials to travel, supplies to move, and information to circulate. Over time, roads would become one of the great symbols of Roman civilization. But their earliest purpose was often military and administrative. They helped Rome hold Italy together. The alliance system was equally important. Rome's Italian allies provided large numbers of soldiers. This meant that Rome's armies were not only Roman in the narrow sense, they were supported by communities across the peninsula. In later wars, especially against Carthage, this manpower system would become decisive. Even after terrible defeats, Rome could raise new armies because its Italian network gave it access to deep reserves of men. But this system had a cost. Rome created unity without full equality. Allies carried burdens without always receiving citizenship. They fought in Roman wars, but did not always share Roman political rights. For a long time, the benefits of Roman order and the fear of Roman punishment held the system together. Yet beneath the surface, resentment remained possible. This is one of the most important lessons in studying Roman history. Roman power was not simply brutal, and it was not simply generous. It was conditional. Rome gave different communities different places within its order. It rewarded loyalty, punished rebellion, divided potential enemies, and turned local aristocracies into partners. The result was a system flexible enough to expand and strong enough to endure. By the end of the conquest of Italy, Rome had created something larger than a city-state, but not yet a territorial empire in the later provincial sense. It had built a confederation under Roman command. Italy became a reservoir of soldiers, roads, colonies, obligations, and ambition. The Republic had discovered a political technology of conquest. This Roman method would soon be carried beyond Italy. But first, Rome would face one more great test on Italian soil: the arrival of a Hellenistic king, Pyrrhus of Epirus, and the armies of the Greek world. Part 9. Closing. Italy becomes the foundation of empire. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had become the dominant power in Italy. This did not mean every community loved Rome or that resistance had disappeared. It meant that the balance of power had changed. No single Italian rival could easily challenge Rome alone. The Republic had grown from a city on the Tiber into the commander of a vast network of allies, colonies, roads, and dependent communities. The conquest of Italy was the foundation of everything that came later. Without Italy, there could be no Mediterranean empire. Without Italian manpower, Rome could not have survived the wars against Carthage. Without colonies and roads, Rome could not have maintained control across wide territories. Without flexible citizenship and alliance structures, Rome could not have absorbed so many different peoples into its military system. This period also shaped the Roman character as later generations understood it. The Romans remembered the fall of Veii, the terror of the Gallic sack, the humiliation at the Caudine Forks, the sacrifice at Sentinum, and the long discipline of war in the mountains. These memories taught them that Rome was chosen not for comfort, but for endurance. The Republic's identity was built around recovery, duty, and the belief that defeat was temporary if discipline remained. But conquest also changed Rome internally. More land, more allies, and more wars meant more wealth and more inequality. Military success strengthened aristocratic competition. Commanders sought glory. Families built reputations through victory. The Republic's institutions, originally designed for a city-state, now had to manage a growing Italian power. The same expansion that made Rome strong would eventually create pressures inside Roman society. For now, however, Rome's future seemed open. The Republic had mastered its first world. It had turned Latium into a base, defeated major Etruscan and Samnite rivals, survived catastrophe, and built a system that transformed enemies into resources. This was the quiet beginning of Roman greatness, not the grandeur of emperors, but the patient construction of power. And beyond southern Italy, the wider Mediterranean was watching. Greek cities in Italy still had their own traditions, their own pride, and their own connections to kings across the sea. When these cities felt threatened by Rome, they would look for help from the Hellenistic world. That help would come in the form of Pyrrhus of Epirus, a king with elephants, ambition, and a reputation for brilliance. In the next episode, Rome will face its first great international test. It will meet a commander trained in the world after Alexander the Great. It will fight battles that are costly even in victory, and it will learn that Italy is not the end of Roman ambition, but the doorway to the Mediterranean. For now, imagine the Roman roads stretching outward from the city, colonies standing like watchfires across the land, allied soldiers answering Roman commands, and the Republic, still young but no longer small, preparing to step beyond Italy and into history.